Well, we're going to take a look at cutting order. Cutting order is a method that will allow you to help hold smaller parts and be able to cut smaller parts with a smaller or with limited vacuum. You want to think about the way you cut, what parts get cut first, and also where the plunge point of that router bit is going to start cutting. Cutting on a CNC with the vacuum, you want to be able to preserve as much of the surface area as possible without cutting all the way through, or you want to cut your biggest parts last, or cut your smallest parts first. We're going to take a look at how we could arrange in Cabinet Parts Pro to cut the smaller parts first. The item that we're going to take a look at here is on the Info tab under Cut Order. We're going to put a checkbox here, and it displays a circle with a number inside of that circle. The circle is indicating what corner of the part is going to make its first plunge, and the number is the part that is going to get cut first in the smallest to biggest. So right now we have in the order of 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and so on. This isn't necessarily by default the way we would want it for cutting if we do not have a strong enough vacuum. You want to think that we'll be cutting in a conventional pattern, which is a left to right, so we will be going around the part anti-clockwise on the outside. So the way we'd want to have this done is starting with the smallest part, thinking that if we had the plunge point here in this lower right corner of this part, that's where we would want to make the initial plunge as it goes up, over, and comes down. The part is still attached to the bigger section of the material while it's making its last cut through. So I'm going to click into the lower right section of this part, and we can see that that number has now become 18, which is the total number of parts that are on this sheet. If we go through each part and click on each part, the part that we click on first is going to end up being the part that is cut first. So I am just going to kind of scroll through each one of these parts, clicking in the area that I feel that is going to help keep this part or a part attached to the full sheet. Again, going around in an anti-clockwise direction, thinking about where it is. So just an example, if I left this number 10 part cut where it is, if it plunges here, comes over, up, and now since these parts have already been cut, the only thing in area and surface area that is holding this part down is the surface area of the part itself. And I'm saying surface area because it is the area of the part that is allowing the vacuum to do its job. So the bigger the parts, the bigger the surface area, the more pressure and the better hold down you have on the bigger parts. So again, thinking as we come around and process this cutting, and I am selecting and cutting on every part that I want to cut in the order that I would want to cut them out in. Coming up into the smaller parts, and finish it out. So as we can see, we are now in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they go in the order that we have selected them and clicked on them. We change the order of the cutting along with the plunge point. So that is the manual way of doing this, and that is the process that you would want to go through if you have a vacuum that isn't quite strong enough to hold some of these smaller parts down. So I'm going to uncheck this and take a look at how we could automatically rearrange and reconfigure where some of these parts and how some of these parts are cut. So if we go into Tools, Settings, and currently we have the square foot. So just by default, it is going to put the smallest part to cut first. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the order the order still might not be right as we just saw, but the smaller parts will be cut first. So for the most part, this option does work and will work. The plunge points we have down below is set to standard, so by default standard is the lower left corner. If I wanted to have the upper right corner always selected as the main plunge point, we could select upper right. When we close the setting, come back into Nest. The nesting is recalculating all of the start points. And come over and click Cut Order again. And again, we can see all of these plunge points are now in the upper right corner. The cutting order is still from the smallest to the biggest. We may want to think about doing from a left to right to where we start cutting all the parts on the left and move down towards the right. It might be that we have our machine zoned off for the vacuum zones as it's cutting, and as it cuts all the parts on the left side, we could shut the zones off to put more vacuum onto the right side. We could do that by going into the Tools, Settings, and set the option to go from left to right. And we will re-nest to apply this. Now selecting cut order, we could see all the parts are cut in the order from the left, upper left to the bottom and to the right. So we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they are cut in the order of the point that is closest to the left edge of the board is cut in that order. And so on. So that might be a possibility to help with hold down as well. Another options that you would have for hold down and better cutting is onion skinning. There is another video specifically on onion skinning, but onion skinning will allow us to cut almost all the way through, then come back and cut all the way through. So in this case, we have the onion skin set to 0.03. It will leave an 03 setting right with an area of 4,000. I'm going to reduce that to 400, which means that it will only onion skin parts that are under 400 square units. And I say units because it could be metric or inches. Currently we are set up in inches, so this is 400 square inches, which means that it will cut all of these parts first with an onion skin, then it will come back and cut in the order of these parts, leaving and coming back and clearing out that onion skin that has already been placed and cut on that part there. So that is cut order and helping with hold down while you're cutting smaller cabinet parts.